Good evening and welcome to the Rabbi Orlofsky live show. When we have the live show in America, you know it's always exciting because it gives me an opportunity to pull in people from my life who you otherwise wouldn't have an opportunity to see or to hear from. Now, that doesn't mean that they aren't very famous in their own right. Rabbi Y.Y. Rubenstein, who was at our last live show, used to actually appear on the BBC. So if you're English, then you know about him. Otherwise, you probably don't. He is Scottish, and he does speak with a very thick accent, and I have translated it. In fact, when we put it up, we put subtitles. But Baruch Hashem, that's not a problem this week, because I have a dear friend who we first began working together in 1979, which was, according to my new biography, 20 years before I was born. So since Superman keeps having reboots, I figure I can also. But at the time, I became Long Island director of NCSY. And just to put that into perspective, I had a chapter in Los Angeles. And I started in July, and by December, they were offering me every region in the country. And they offered me to take over West Coast, which had 7 states and 2 provinces and big offices on Wilshire Boulevard. They offered me every region, and I took Long Island. They told me later, because I came from Long Island, they had to cover up the phone so I wouldn't hear everybody laughing. Long Island had gone through 5 directors in 2 years. It was worse than nothing. So when I came there was only one kid in the region because she was on national board. She had to belong. There was no office. There were no chapters. There was no anything. I moved into my old bedroom in my parents' house, put in my own phone line with the $225 a month that they gave me to pay for expenses. And I said, how am I supposed to run an entire region with $225 a month? And they said, it's only one kid. It's a lot of money. So they weren't really counting on me lasting that long. So it was very exciting. So one of the places I came to was Long Beach, and a very unusual shul there called Bachurei Chemed. And there was a Rav there who, I can't speak for everybody, but I could not figure out what he was doing there. A tremendous Talmid Chacham, a person who was obviously going to be one of the future leaders of Klal Yisrael, and he was in Bachurei Chemed, which was a shul that was run by the kids. And so the kids basically told the rabbi what was going to be. I davened there just because it was so absolutely fascinating, And Rabbi Frankel, Rav Yitzchok Dovid Frankel, he would have open question and answer at the end. Any kid could ask a question, but every now and then an adult would actually put in a question because, he'd turn to a kid and he'd say, what's pshat in the Marshor's Kasha and the Tosfos? And, so it was sort of a setup. You could tell that right away. But anyway, there was nothing that they threw his way that he couldn't answer. And it was really amazing. So, Rabbi Frankel is with us. He is now the Rav of the Aguda of the 5 towns. Thank you. He has smicha from R Moshe Feinstein. I know this because one of his brisim that was in MTJ in the Lower East Side at 6 o'clock in the morning, I was living in Long Island. For me to get there, I had to leave 2 days beforehand and just keep circling around trying to find parking, And I remember as he was saying the Dvar Torah, he said something, I say this over all the time. He says, when a bar mitzvah boy says over his Dvar Torah, there's a minute to sing him down. When a chosin is speaking at the Sheva Brachos, there's a minute to sing him down, except for my father-in-law, who didn't have that minute. So he told me at my Shabbos Sheva Brachos, you'll say. I said, well, I don't have to prepare too much. They'll sing me down. He says, not here. So I had to quickly make up something, and it was, if I can say honestly, brilliant. And he was not impressed. But anyway, but Rabbi Frankel, when he was getting ready to say his Dvar Torah, he said, how come by a bris, you don't sing down the Father? if there's anyone who deserves to be sung down, it's the father, because he hasn't had any sleep. He's been running back and forth from the hospital, taking care of kids, etc. And he says, because Rav Moshe always said, by a bris, you don't sing down. I remember this. You don't remember. It does make a difference. But you said this over in the name of Rav Moshe. You said because by a chosin, if he doesn't know anything, okay, by a bar mitzvah boy, he doesn't know anything. He says, but by a bris, Rav Moshe says, if you don't know how to say Dvar Torah, if you don't know how to say a pshetel, then we have to take upon ourselves to educate that kid. So we have a direct, and I say this over all the time. And I was once by a bris by Rav Gusman, a fellow I knew, making a bris, and he looked so nervous. It was his first kid. So I said, don't worry, I know the mile, he's a professional, he knows what he does. I don't care what they do to the baby. I have to say over Dvar Torah in front of Rav Gusman. One time someone said a whole complicated Dvar Torah, and Rav Gusman at the end says, I'm surprised, you're Ben Torah, you could do better than that. No, I just thought of those words that Rabbi Frankel used to say from Rav Moshe in those kind of instances. So that's the story. And so it is a privilege for me to welcome one of the people that I can consider a Rebbe, over the years, who has always been there to instruct and to lead me. In fact, I'll tell you one more Rabbi Frankel story beforehand. And that is, he would come to the regional convention. The first one was in Long Beach, so obviously he was the Rav there. And we had a banquet. If you've never been to an NCSY banquet, basically we inspire people to become religious by giving them awards and playing maudlin music and making a speech about them and then dancing. And this goes on till about 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, And at some point, when this whole thing finished, so Rabbi Frankel says to me, what about Ma'ariv? And I was like, oh yeah. He says, you should put it in the program. And I was like, oh yeah. So after that, Rabbi Frankel would come to every convention just to check up on me. He was our rabbinic leadership in Long Island and NCSY. Anyway, he comes to the second convention. He goes, what's this? I had printed up a program. I said, what do you mean? He says, it says over here between the most special Forever Award and the even more special Forever Award, it says Ma'ariv. I said, well, you told me last time that I should put Ma'ariv in the program. He goes, you listened to me? I said, yeah. He goes, wow, I didn't think anybody would listen to me when I gave them a suggestion like this, So that was the start. So, ladies and gentlemen, a privilege to welcome to the Rabbi Orlofsky I'm Not Dead Yet show, Rabbi Yitzchok Frankel. Now, I have to tell you that among the many things that Rabbi Frankel did is he would go to Reb Dovid, Reb Moshe and Reb Dovid, and he would ask him questions. And he would collect them all. And one time he gave me what I would call a choveret, a booklet, which is all of the psakim that Reb Dovid had given him. And now, here it is, actually hard-covered, Shabbos and Shuvas Yad Dodi. And Rabbi Frankel has put this together. And he was just telling me as he came into the shul where we're doing this, he said they saw the sefer. He goes, we just bought this for the shul, and this is a must, to be able to have these psakim, because Rabbi Frankel, who is so down to earth and so practical, put this together for people, and this is something that everyone should take advantage of that exists. We'll start with the sponsorship. It is a refuah shlema for Tinuk Ben Shendel, and they should have a refuah shlema. They just had open heart surgery yesterday, so your tefillas are needed and welcomed. And the Mirza Hashem and the schus of the Torah that we're going to do today, and the people who are here. Everyone, please, will say a tefillah. Everyone in Torah anytime who sees this, anybody who watches it when it goes up, and all of the other platforms that the Rabbi Orlofsky show hopefully will go up. Hopefully we'll say a tefillah for him. All right, Frankel, welcome to the show.
Am I supposed to talk?
No, it reminds me of a story. I have another Rabbi Frankel story. I have so many Rabbi Frankel stories.
I'm just a cardboard cutout right now. He just put me here, and I'm just stuck here. He talks.
So let's get a little background. Now, you grew up in Brooklyn,
No,
the Lower East Side,
no.
Cleveland.
Oh, close.
Where?
Pine Brook, New Jersey.
All right, there's no such a place. You just made that up.
Yes, there is. Pine Brook, New Jersey is a very big town in northern New Jersey. You can find it when you drive down. There was no Route 80 at the time. It was only Route 46. There's a sign as you come into Pine Brook that says, "Welcome to Pine Brook." On the other side of the sign, it says, "Welcome to Pine Brook."
What were you doing in Pine Brook, New Jersey?
My father was the rabbi of Pine Brook, New Jersey.
Really?
So from the age of 6 until 18, my father was there for 12 years. Olav Hashalom, my father, was the Rav of Pine Brook, New Jersey. That I couldn't tell you. Not a lot.
In the shul.
Even, it was a shul that really did not have very many from people. So you saw them really on Rosh Hashanah. Yom Kippur was that one of the time
Shabbos,
places.
there was a minyan?
Shabbos was a minyan, but I will tell you that my father, I'll tell you a story about Pine Brook, New Jersey. I grew up without ever going to shul Friday night and without ever going to shul Shabbos Mincha.
I do that now. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway.
And that's because my father, Olav Hashalom, also learned Tveras Sh'Shalayim. My family goes back to Tveras Sh'Shalayim before.
He was an MTJ.
My father started with Tveras Sh'Shalayim before.
Before Reb Moshe?
Before, long before. My father was from the third grade. There was a Rav Adler who was there. Actually, before the Rosh Yeshiva, there was Shmuel Graneman happened to have been there. Matter of fact, I have a picture of my father. My Rosh Yeshiva was my father. It was my Masada Kedushin for my parents. And walking down by the chuppah was I have a picture of Shmuel Graneman and Rosh Yeshiva talking to each other, walking down.
He came to America in the 1930s, no?
Yes, so he was there probably in the 30s, right? But the Shiva didn't come until like 38, 39. And my father started in the third grade. So a story about that. Also, my uncle Olav Hashalom, my father had an older brother who was a little over a year older than he. And when my uncle was going into the fifth grade, they were in a different yeshiva. My father was going into the third grade. My uncle was going to the fifth grade. And my uncle said in the yeshiva that they were in, they didn't start Gemara until the sixth grade. So my uncle came home one day and he told his mother that he wants to start learning Gemara, and they don't teach Gemara in the fifth grade, and he needs the yeshiva to learn Gemara. And the rest, and my family became part of Tveras Yushalayim, the woodwork actually. All those years, my father was my first grade Rebbe. My father was the Rebbe in Tveras Yushalayim. It was my first grade Rebbe. He taught me Aleph Beis, and then he got promoted. And I had him again in the fifth grade. He taught me Haschalas Gemara. My father was my Rebbe.
You went from this little town in New Jersey, you would go to MTJ.
Every day. My father was the rabbi. We drove in every day. Yeah.
How long a drive is that?
In the beginning, it was about an hour. By the time at the end of the 12 years, the development of, you've heard of Parsippany Troy Hills. It's in that area. By that time.
That's an interesting assumption that I've heard.
You heard of Parsippany Troy Hills? But there's a Hilton out there in Parsippany Troy Hills that people go to, so that's why people heard of it. And the trip in was more like an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes. On Sunday, we drove in on Sunday, 45 minutes.
Wow.
So, there and back. And then he
drove you and drove home and then came back?
Okay, so twice a week, I actually took a bus home. I took a train. I took the train from Tveras Yushalayim. I took the train. Yeah, my parents. My parents say all the time. My mother live and be well. Today they would be arrested because here I was in the fifth grade, 10 years old. I took the train from the Lower East Side, from East Broadway to West 4th Street, switched to upstairs to the E train, took the E train to 42nd Street, walked to the Port Authority, and took a bus home.
So back then it wasn't a given you would die if you did that.
It was not a given. That's correct. Matter of fact, it would have been pretty strange.
They weren't slashing people on the subway.
Yeah,
and,
it's hard to believe. Hard to believe. The subways are unsafe.
Wow. So, but this is a big schlep back and forth.
Yeah, so every day came, and twice a week I took the trains home.
So you had a kesher with Rav Moshe then?
So the answer is yes. My family, my uncle Elvashon was in the first smicha class the Shiva had. My father was soon after him. Shiva was my father had smicha from the Shiva Zechat Livracha, and he was there Masada Kedushin. And my bar mitzvah, which was in Pine Brook, New Jersey, not so close to New York, Rabbi Feinstein or Shiva Zechat Livracha came to my bar mitzvah. I have a picture, not for Shabbos. Right. It was a Sunday. He came Sunday, and he drove out to Pine Brook. And my family did have a very close gesture with the yeshiva. Yes.
And Rav Dovid and Rav Reuven were in the yeshiva at the time?
Yes.
They were giving shiur?
Rav Reuven not. Rav Reuven came later. Rav Reuven gave shiur, came really when I was, later on he became a Rebbe. He was the 8th grade Rebbe, Rav Reuven. But Rav Dovid was always the first year base medrash. And I was in Rav Dovid Shia. I was 16 years old. I was in Rav Dovid Shia. I was a senior in high school.
Wow. I'll tell you a story that you'll appreciate. You had in Long Beach a fellow Eli who opened up a deli on the Lower East Side.
Yeah, regards from him. I just was in touch with him today.
Called Someplace Special or something? I don't know what it was. I happened to be on the Lower East Side.
Eli Goldberg.
Right. And I go into this deli, and this frum guy walks in. I don't know who he
It was a deli. It wasn't a pizza shop.
It was a deli.
Yeah, I know, but he's
sitting there schmoozing with somebody, and he says, "Oh, come over." And he says, "Do you know who this is? This is Dovid Orlofsky. He runs NCSY Long Island." And he goes, "Oh, yeah." He says, "A really chashuv guy, I said, "Oh, yeah, thank you so much." I said, "And who are you?" He goes, "Reuven Feinstein." I said, "Oh, I heard of you too." That's the best part of the story. Best part of the story. This was in the 80s when the whole people finally found out about bugs, because no one knew about bugs before then. And the reason no one knew about bugs is because they used DDT.
Correct.
Which killed all the bugs and also the people eating the vegetables. So they got rid of DDT and then there were bugs. So anyway, Ellie brings him a sandwich and he says to him, "Do you want the coleslaw?" So Reuven says, "Why? What's wrong with the coleslaw?" He goes, Your Talmidim don't eat my coleslaw because they're worried about the bugs. He says, "Give me their portion." So it was different. It was different back then.
Sure was. Sure was.
So you go through, and then you're in base medrash.
I was in the base medrash by Rav Dovid, and then I was I left for 1 year. I was after high school. I went for 1 year in the Yeshiva in Brooklyn, and I came back, and I learned Rav Shishkel Zechat Livracha, and was by the Rosh Yeshiva and the Rosh Yeshiva Shir for quite a number of years. Yeah.
So, how did Rav Moshe give shir?
Well, there were 2 different shiurim. He gave 3 different shiurim. One shir he gave was the daf shir, which he gave in the morning once a week, sometimes twice a week, and then there was the pilpul shir, which he gave on Friday. That was the main. That's a dibros Moshe that you would be seeing would be the pilpul shir on Friday, and that was for an hour and a half.
But there weren't a lot of people there.
You're right. And I remember sitting there looking around and saying, one day, people are really going to be sorry they're not here.
Yeah. What?
Because
what was
really, because you're on the Lower East Side, 3/4 of the world, maybe more of that is in Brooklyn, and they don't want to get on a train and come to the Lower East Side. So today people get on a plane and fly to Eretz Yisrael every other week to see one of the Gedolei Yisrael. Here they could have come down any day. Their Shiva was sitting in the base medrash at a table. You can still see that if you go down to the east side today, the table's still there at his desk. And he came in the morning, davened. They brought him breakfast. He ate it at his desk, and then he sat down, and he was there all morning, unless he had a meeting here, there, and the other thing, and he would sit and be writing. And anybody could come. We even had a telephone. They used to have telephones connected to the walls.
When you were there, he was still using the quill?
He never did anything else but the quill.
Even afterwards?
No, never, always.
With an inkwell?
The Shiva, always had an inkwell. Never used a ballpoint pen. He found them uncomfortable. In Europe, he only had ink and a fountain pen. And
did you ever use a quill? or a fountain pen?
When we were in high school, we used to have these fountain pens where you bought little,
Right.
cartridges. You stuck them in. I used to use that, but the Shiva says that we used to use had an inkwell. He always had an inkwell on his desk. The famous story of Nissan Albert. Once went over, he had just Rosh Shiva had gotten a new shas, and he actually knocked the inkwell over, and got blue ink all over the Gemara. And Rosh Shiva looked at it and said, "Oh, that's a nice color." So, we're always using an inkwell, always using a fountain pen.
So you could just go over and ask him a shayla
You
whenever
could
you
go
wanted.
over, people called, and they asked, and you could questions you could call, and there was in the office we had there was a secretary it's hard to describe. If you have to see pictures of the old time secretaries with something on their head, and they were sticking wires in.
The
So it has a
switchboard.
switchboard. It's called a switchboard, and they used the switch when the switchboard used to put phone calls. They used to put the call to yeshiva, and she always put the calls through for the base medrash. In the middle of shir, the phone would ring.
And he would pick it up.
No, that he didn't do. But the phone would ring and disturb it, and I would go into the office later and say, "What are you doing? This is the time where the shir is. Why are you calling, putting it through?" So we started taking the phone off the hook when we started shir. But you could call, Rashiva was sitting at the desk, you could call him anytime, ask him questions. And when he wasn't there, the phone would ring, so we would pick it up, and if there was someone around who could answer the question, they would answer the question. And if they weren't, they would ask any type of question. Any type of question. I once picked up the phone, and there was a woman on the other end. She said it was Rosh Chodesh, and she wanted to know if she was allowed to wash her floor. That was the shilas that she would call Rabbi Moshe Feinstein to find out if you're allowed to wash your floor. A woman's allowed to wash her floor on Rosh Chodesh. Other such questions that you might want to call and ask the Dovid Hador.
Reb Moshe would not shy away from anything.
Nothing.
I'll tell you a story that it was known that he would on occasion be oiker a reform kedushin. It was a reform kedushin, and he would say, the shilas mamzeres and this and that, and he would just say, it was never
Correct.
Right. He didn't do it with conservative.
She did.
Well, now here's the story. In the 1980s, there was this Baal Tshuva. He married a Grusha. He was a Kohen. And then they became frum. What do you do?
Correct.
So somebody got me involved, and I asked, certain people who were close to Rav Moshe, and they said, don't get involved. Rav Moshe has never undid a conservative, marriage. So the person who called me, I said, they told me not to get involved. So he says, I'll call this lady. So she calls up, and Reb Dovid answers the phone. And Reb Dovid says, don't get involved. He says, I appreciate that, but I didn't call to talk to you. I called to talk to your father. Please put him on the phone. So Rav Moshe gets on the phone, and he was Ike the Kedushin, a conservative Kedushin. It never happened before until this time. This was the first case, and he would just go into these things. And today, so they say, well, Reb Dovid was alive. Reb Dovid would also handle shilas like Reb Moshe.
Correct.
That's what this book is. Safer,
yes, correct. Correct. But you have to understand something that you can't get the wrong idea, because there's the flip side of that. This was talking about a situation where there was a person who was already married and was becoming from, and they had been married before, and there was a shaila, and they were married with a reform rabbi or conservative rabbi, and now they had married again, and there was no get in between. That's all after the fact. Before the fact, Rashiva and Reb Dovid were very makpid that to get a get. And the following story I had, a couple comes to me, they want to get married. Somebody in my shul in Long Beach had a cousin who had been married and now wanted to remarry, but she didn't have a get. And they wanted me to be in Masada Kedushin. She didn't have. She came. They spoke to me, and I said she was married, but it was by a reform. She says to me, it was a reform rabbi, and we got married on Tisha B'Av. So I'm sure there's not, that's nothing, So I said, no, you have to get a get. I spoke to Reb Dovid that time. Dovid, I spoke to Reb Dovid beforehand just to give a guarantee and verify that even though they had been living in New Milford, Connecticut, which, just to put things in perspective, Rav Henkin Zechatzaddik Livrocha held that marriage of that form, where people were living together as husband and wife, would have the status of a marriage, but that would only be if there were religious people around. And it had to be living amongst religious people who knew that they were living as husband and wife. Shiva didn't hold that way. But nevertheless, in this case, New Milford, Connecticut at that time, there wasn't any religion. There were no Jews, let alone religious Jews.
So your town in New Jersey, where you came from.
Oh, we had more. I was choshev. So we arranged a bezdin with a sofer to go up to New Milford, Connecticut. Now, we couldn't write a get in New Milford, Connecticut. We weren't going to get this man who is now divorced from his previous wife, she was suing him for who knows how much money. And so he actually had a law degree, but that's not how he earned his living. He earned his living because he had two pet food stores in New Milford, one in New Milford. And we went up to his office to meet him there. We went up with a whole slew of Rabbanim, went up with a bezdin, went up with a sofer, went up with Adim, went up to meet him up in New Milford, Connecticut. To make a long story short, we had to make a shliach. Dafayom is learning Git now. Well, that was a lot of the halachos that you would normally be learning were all done in that one situation. Then we had to come back to New York and write the get in New York, in Manhattan, because you couldn't write a get in New Milford, Connecticut. He had to make a shliach. We came back, and she didn't want to see him, and he didn't want to see her anyway. And so therefore, she gave her the get in New York. Okay, over, right? So I meet with them again, and now she's ready to get married. I got her a get, right? Get them better, and I say, meet with them. Now I have to ask them the normal questions. What's your Hebrew name? What's your Hebrew name? Your parents? I need to make sure that they're really Jewish, right? And he says to me, I say to him, your mother, I want to know who his mother is. He said, and your father? He says, I'm a Kohen. You're a Kohen.
Yeah, so was my dad.
That's what a coincidence. You know the significance of what I just said, but maybe your friends don't know. A Kohen can't marry a divorced woman. So I try to say to him, well, maybe you're not a Kohen. He says a Kohen. Maybe he's not a Kohen. Why would I even think he's not a Kohen? I'll tell you, I have another story, so you're not the only one. In Pine Brook, New Jersey, just to tell you what happened, there was a bar mitzvah in Pine Brook, New Jersey. I remember very clearly because I used to stand next to my father, Olav Shalom, when my father was the Balkore, not only the rabbi, he was also the Balkore, the Chazan, the shofar.
Well, he was the only one there. So.
That's basically. He only one who knew how to read Hebrew, actually. But my father was the Balkore, and he would also call the people up. So he says amongst the bar mitzvah of guests, he said, anybody here a Kohen? A young fellow raises his hand. He's a Kohen. My father calls him up. I'm calling. Did anybody a Levi? And another man, an older man, raises his hand, and my father looks at him and says, I'm standing right there. I'm watching this. He says, aren't you his father? The Levi was the Kohen's father, So you're not always people who are not observant.
Yeah,
really know what they're talking about. So that's a lesson I learned as a kid. So I said, maybe you're not. How do I know you're a Kohen? He says to me, no. He says, Rabbi, I was out in Wellwood by my grandfather's grave, and on the monument there are hands. I then had to explain to them that I could not be performing this wedding after I went through this whole thing. At least I got her a get. So they were fine with that. They knew they could go to a conservative rabbi and take care of it for them, which is what they did. That was that. So the point of the story is that even though after the fact, the Shiva would definitely be matir certain situations because the Reform rabbi is Pasal Eidos and there was no kosher Eidim, no kosher witnesses there, or even a conservative situation, there were no kosher witnesses. But nevertheless, at the end of the day, in advance of anything like that, It was always very makpid to make sure that the get was received, that there always a get given.
So if you had a Reb Moshe Shaila today, who would you go to?
Reb Reuven. He's the only one I could talk to.
Wow.
Yeah. And he's not so easy to reach either.
All right, so I want to talk about some of the other interesting things you've had, but there's a burning issue in Klal Yisrael that must be addressed. Now, you are now a Rav of an Aguda.
Scooters are not mutter on Shabbos.
No, that's not it.
Oh, I thought it was, because
That would be an easier one. No, there's a worse one I'm going to ask you.
the other day, I saw a man in a nice gray suit with tie scooting down the street, going to shul on Shabbos.
Right.
I was ready to call out Shabbos, Shabbos, Shabbos. I wasn't Yerushalayim. So
no, that would be an easy one.
Okay.
No, I'm going to ask you a much harder one. Take into account the fact that you are now a Rav of an Aguda.
Yeah.
Okay, so you go to the Aguda convention and you get in with like the Aguda pass. You know what I mean? Like I'm official card carrying man, right? and I know this question is going to possibly destroy your entire reputation. And I know already the answer because I had the choveret before the sefer came out, and I assume it made it into the sefer. And that's the following: I have heard from a dozen people that Rav Moshe never really allowed goyish milk. He only said if you're living in Kansas and there's no milk there and there's someone who's sick and there's a baby, then you could rely on the fact that the USDA gives it. But otherwise, of course, you have to use Chalav Yisrael. So my question is, when Rav Moshe gave this tshuva, which he refers to as Chalav HaCompanies, he didn't call it Stam Chalav, he didn't call it Chalav Aguda, he called it Chalav HaCompanies. Was that for extreme situations where someone is going to die unless he has this over here, unless he absolutely has to have milk or a Kit Kat, or did he allow it on more broad circumstances? And then we'll discuss what your next job is going to be. But anyway, because I know you're an honest man, you'll answer this question honestly.
All the Talmidim of the Shiva knew very clearly, without any question, that the Shiva held that the Chalav companies was 100% mutter l'chatchila.
And you do not have to have Chalav Yisrael.
That's let me put it to you this way, okay? If you have a choice between the two, I'll give you another example. So a Doraisa question.
Because I read on the Choveret, and I'm going to tell you what you wrote. Okay. I don't know if the publishers took it out of the book.
On a Doraisa level, Chodosh, for example, a lot of people are makpid today on Chodosh. Once upon a time, nobody even knew what Chodesh was. But Chodesh is
right. By the way, just like I explained about the bugs, no one knew about bugs. The reason no one knew about Yashan is because we had a wheat surplus for
didn't exist
7 years, so no one ever had Chodesh. And then Nixon sold the wheat surplus to Russia, and suddenly new grain came on the market. There was never a question before. So. Yeah, I'm sorry.
So we're talking about Chodesh. So I was present when someone actually asked Reb Dovid directly if he was makpid on Yashan, and he said no. So that's a Doraisa, right?
Right.
But if you have a choice between eating Yashan and Chodesh, then of course you eat Yashan. And the same thing would apply, and that's what I put in. It's the same status, same idea. And I was once involved in a school, not a day school. It was a Chashvish school, also on the island, but it's a Chashvish school where those days they had 2 lines for lunch.
The Chalav Yisrael?
The Chalav Yisrael line and the not Chalav Yisrael line.
Right.
And
the people who were smiling were on the non-Chalav Yisrael line.
So I was actually teaching. I taught in that school, and I asked Reb Dovid then if there's a choice, if they're, does it make a difference on what line I'm on if they're serving both? He said, if they're serving both, you take the Chalav Yisrael. So if you have equally accessible Chalav Yisrael and not Chalav Yisrael, there's no question that Dovid told me clearly that you take the Chol of Yisrael.
What you had written in that Choveret that I have at home still, with your name on it,
And I use it as, I said, compare it to Chodesh, right?
is that you said, you asked Reb Dovid, is there an Inyan to be machmir to have Chol Yisrael during the Aseret Yemei Tshuva?
That's for sure. He said no.
And he said no.
Correct.
He said because it's not a
not a
kula, it's me'ikar adin.
Correct.
Right.
That is 100% true.
So then, if a guy comes to you
the issue
and says, "Can I eat OUD or not? Can I have Kit Kats? Can I have
You're
Milky
asking,
Ways?"
you know, I don't know why we're still on this subject, but
Because this is
I need to
fascinating.
get
Because
ho-
everybody says to
I
me,
need to get home today.
everybody says to me,
But,
Reb Moshe never really
not true.
meant for that.
Okay, again,
And if you read the Chuvas, somebody
Correct.
writes him back and says, "No, because," and he comes back and he
agreed.
says,
And when that tshuva came out, when that sefer came out, I spoke to Rav Dovid about it. And I spoke to Rav Dovid about that exactly when that first tshuva came out. I spoke to Rav Dovid about it. He did not change his mind, didn't change the tshuva, did
Right.
not, because what he wrote as a tshuva for a certain place. Let me tell you another story, and then maybe you'll get a better idea. And it's something that I just heard recently. Chazon Ish did a similar thing. Depending on two people who asked the same question, I got totally different answers. Because for him it was one thing, for him it was another. It had to do with when one person something was mutter because Chazon Ish looked at him and said to him, this was he looked like a weak fellow who, if he couldn't eat whatever it is he was asking him about, it wasn't healthy. And the other fellow was a strong guy, so he said, no, for you it's a usher. A fellow once asked Rosh Shiva. You have to understand one more thing. In Tiferes Yerushalayim, there was a candy machine all the years that I was growing up, and even beyond that. There was a candy machine, and stam cholov chocolate was the only thing being served. They didn't even
"There was
have
no
an
Chol
option.
Yisrael
There was
chocolate
none whatsoever. Hershey bars were sold. Hershey bars, Nestle bars, when they were whatever.
in MTJ."
In MTJ, it was sold in the candy machine, and nobody thought anything about it because we all knew that that's what the Shiva really held.
Did Reb Dovid eat it?
So now, I'll tell you what they say.
I'm sure Reb Reuven did because he ate the coleslaw with the bugs.
Reb Nissen Alpert was once asked about it, and he said, he's makpid, he only eats Chol of Yisrael, but in his family he has stam cholov in the house. But he himself was makpid. If Reb Dovid himself, what he did, I couldn't tell you. I didn't watch.
But he gave it in the candy machine in MTJ.
in MTJ. That's
In
correct.
MTJ. The candy machine.
Okay. Ice cream. Okay. It may not
Ice
be-
cream.
Okay.
He ate Carvel. Carvel?
No. Okay.
Baskin Robbins?
Okay. I know.
I get those.
I'm not prepared to say about anything of that sort, and I know when someone made a claim like that, Reb Dovid would deny it. That's all. He would deny those things. But so I can't say what he did or didn't do in his private life. I'm not ready to say.
Two more controversial stories that we're gonna.
It can't be more controversial than this.
Wait, you'll see.
Okay.
Yeah. First of
I'll
all,
leave it to you.
the Moshe held there's no schita by paper,
Correct.
which means that you can take a napkin and wipe up on Shabbos.
Correct.
Right? He never changed that.
Never.
Okay, because people say afterwards he changed it.
People say a lot of things afterwards. They did.
Right.
They say it lakula too.
Yeah.
Right. There was a rabbi here in Brooklyn who wrote a whole thing that the yeshiva was matir. Reb Dovid had to write a tshuva against it. They wrote a whole chaveris that Rabbi Feinstein held that the Erev in Brooklyn was okay, which of course he didn't. He was
Right.
very strongly opposed to it. Very strongly opposed to it, and Reb Dovid had to write a whole letter saying that that's just totally untrue. It's fake news. But,
So taking napkins
same
and wiping
thing,
up a
yeah.
spill on Shabbos, what
Yeah.
Moshe held was
yeah,
right. He wouldn't let you use liquid soap,
correct,
right, or Shabbos clogs,
correct.
right. But you could use a napkin to wipe up.
Okay, sounds. I don't know what the connection is, but I'll figure it out.
What about baby wipes?
Okay, so baby wipes is if depends on the baby wipes. If
Does it depend on the baby or just
it
the baby?
depends on the baby wipes,
Okay.
because today baby wipes are sometimes have natural fibers. If you take a look at them, they were made with cotton and natural fibers. That already, Reb Dovid told me was usher. It's only because it's only paper. Only paper is something that was not considered something that had a din schita, but anything else that was cotton or any other natural fibers were not permitted. And so some of the baby wipes really are very thick and are not totally synthetic.
Okay, the famous story of the lady who came over and kissed him on the cheek, and Rav Moshe said, "Don't say anything. She's a Holocaust survivor."
Yeah, that was.
It was written up,
It was written up.
and then supposedly Rav Dovid said it wasn't true.
I know the fellow who wrote it
And
and what he said, and I have no way of knowing what he what he said is true or not. I could not begin to tell you one way or the other.
does it sound like something that might have? For those of you who don't know the story, a person
Okay,
wrote
we don't
the
know.
story. I'll tell you the story.
Okay.
He wrote it up.
Yes,
It's the
he
story.
did. He wrote it up
He wrote it up that
Yes.
Rav Moshe was up in the mountains. He had to go to a doctor
in Ellenville.
in Ellenville, and the wife of the doctor, who was the nurse, when he comes in, he says, "Oh, Rav Moshe," and gives him a kiss on the cheek. And there was a yeshiva bacher who was there, and his mouth dropped open, and he was just beyond. And supposedly Rav Moshe said, "She's a Holocaust survivor. You don't say anything." That's the story that he wrote up.
Yes, that's good. That story he wrote up. I never spoke to anybody about the story. I never assumed one way or the other about the story.
Then I
It
heard
could be
afterwards
true.
that
It could
Rav
be
Dovid said
not.
it
That
wasn't
doesn't.
true.
It could be. It wasn't true.
But Rav Dovid wasn't
And if
there.
it was true, what difference does it make?
Because
What difference does it make if it's true?
that won't make it
If
into the
someone
article
comes over,
biography.
if someone comes over, it's okay. But if someone comes over to someone and grabs them and gives them a kiss, what are you supposed to do about it? Like, tell me what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to
I
slap
just-
them?
I just wanna know if-
supposed to take out your gun and shoot them?
Does it seem
What do
like
you
the
do?
kind of thing that he would have said?
What is it? Something that he might have said? You say Reb Dovid said never happened. So is it something
Reb
that he
Dovid
could
wasn't there.
say? I don't know why. Why wouldn't he be able to say that? Why she's in it? So you don't. She's a Holocaust survivor. She doesn't know
In other
better.
words,
She's whatever.
I
her
didn't find the
situation
story
is.
shocking.
No, I don't find anything about that story to be in any way. The fellow who said the story is an individual who is from a more modern background.
Right.
So to him, it was a big deal. To me, it's not a big deal. It's just not a big deal. Because it could be true and it could be not true. And either or, it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't teach us anything more than what we already know.
Right.
The Holocaust survivors, we have a gift cover to Holocaust survivors. There's no question about it. That the story could have happened, it could have happened. Did it happen? I don't know.
And then did Rav Moshe say brain death is okay? Think I'll come at it from the other side.
I'm sorry, I have
All right.
problem hearing this.
This is, I have to tell you, because there are very few people who have had the access to Rav Moshe and Rav Dovid that you have, and which really puts you in a unique position today. I had heard a story. I don't know if it's true or not. I had heard a story. I'm not Pesach Corona. I don't check these things out. That's my standard that somebody told the story to Rav Moshe, and he says it never happened. So he says, but it's written up. He says, I'm alive and they're making up stories about me. What happens when I'm dead?
I was there in the Beis Medrash when this all happened. I know the story. The story was that someone came in and was talking to a shiva about the Chassam Sofer. And they said over, and then they would say over in the name of Chassam Sofer, he didn't want to enjoy his tea. So he was waiting to drink really hot. And he would drink it real hot so he wouldn't have any hana from his tea. And Rosh Hashiva said the story is sheker. It says, Chassam Sofer is given a normaler mensch.
Yeah.
And so the story is not true. He says, but everybody says it. So Shiva said to him that time, he says, ze sagen meestal mir and ich bin da. So they tell stories about me and I'm alive. What's no secret, that these stories came about and they make the circuit. And you can hear stories about The truth is, if you live long enough, you hear the same story about 5 different Gedolim, the same story. You know,
Right.
It said, this person's name, that was it. The story, maybe the story is true with somebody, but maybe the whole thing is not true. But yeah, that's correct. Even when Shiva was alive, people said stories about him that were not true.
Well, I heard a story, I don't know if it's true, that when Shlomo Zalman, when Shach was starting Degel Torah, Shlomo Zalman didn't join in. And so when the Yatid would mention Shlomo Zalman, they wouldn't say Maron. They would just say, Harav Shlomo Zalman Orbach, And the Talmidim said, we should make it Macha because it's not covered in Torah. This is the story I heard. You know the story? So Shlomo Zalman said, covered in Torah. He says, about what they write about me in a newspaper. He says, let me tell you a story. He says, I get a call in the middle of the night from Moshe Feinstein. And he says, listen, I have a shaila here. It's mamash pikuach nefesh. I need to talk it through with somebody. He says, do you have a few minutes? So Rav Moshe talks it through, and Shlomo Zalman says, I think like this. So Rav Moshe says, that's what I thought also. He says, so that Rav Moshe would call me up to talk it through, and that I was machavan to Rav Moshe would say, and you think I care about what they write about me in a newspaper? You ever hear this story?
No.
Does it make sense?
No.
Why is that?
Because I don't believe the story, and I don't believe that Shiva ever called Rav Shlomo Zalman for anything, honestly.
Okay.
You have to understand
Too bad,
the
this was a
difference
great
of the
story.
Tekufis. The Tekufis, where there is a Rav Shlomo Zalman story that was told over, that is a true story, when Rav Shiva was already very sick, and it was right before his Patira, and she was very sick at the time. And a fellow came to Rav Shlomo Zalman with a shaila, and it was a very difficult shaila. And Rav Shlomo Zalman said, "We have to call. I can't answer this question. We have to call the Dovid Orlofsky." He said, You weren't able to reach Rosh Shiva at the time. It was not. He's not reachable. There was no phone call. He was not well. So they called Reb Nissen Albert, who lived across the street. And Reb Nissen said, I don't know if I can get to Rosh Shiva. He heard the story. So Reb Shlomo Zalman told him over the shaila. So he went across the street, and he was able to get in. He saw the Rosh Shiva. The Rosh Shiva was really not. It wasn't a period of time it would be even fair to ask him a Shavera Shaila, but he was told by Shlomo Zalman to ask it, so he asked it. And the Shiva sat there and looked at him and says, "This is Nish Nogea." So he said the story over again. So he told over the Maisa over again. And the Shiva said to him, "This is Nish Nogea." So he wasn't getting through to the Shiva. He felt he wasn't getting through, so he went back. Called Shlomo Zalman back. They were waiting for him on the phone on the other side. And he said to him, she was not well. I told him over the Maisa. I said to him twice. Both times he said to me, it's Nish Nogea. I can't tell you any more than that. On the other side, the Rav who had come to ask Rav Shlomo Zalman the question, so Rav Shlomo Zalman put on his hat and said, I suppose it was time to go. Daven Mincha, he was ready to leave. He said, but the Rav said, but what's soll ich tun? And Rav Shlomo Zalman said, what do you mean, what's soll ich tun? It says Nish Nogea. The Dovid Orlofsky says Nish Nogea is Nish Nogea. Maybe Nish Nogea in New York is not Nogea here, but it's Nogea. I mean, I have a Baal boss who has the Shiloh. I mean, what? So it's very nice. Everybody's telling me it's Nish Nogea. A day or two go by, and the Rav doesn't hear back from the person who had originally presented him with this difficult Shiloh that Rav Shlomo Zalman couldn't answer. He sees him once in the street, and he said 2 days later, he says to him, you never called me back. He says, was not Nogea.
Wow. You knew the Rebbitzin?
Sure.
I heard a story from Moro.
Yeah, Moro knew well, everybody well.
Where he says there was a story that when Rav Moshe was a Rav in Russia, that you know the story?
I don't know. Tell me the story. There were a lot of stories.
They rounded up all the Rabbanim to go out and dig ditches, the communists, to be mashpil them. I mean, when they come to Rav Moshe, the Rebbitzin gets a coat. He says, what are you doing? He says, we arranged when we got married that you handle the Ruchnis and I handle the Gashmis. This is Gashmis. And she went out with the Rabbanim to go and she wouldn't let Rav Moshe go, and she went out with the Rabbanim to go and dig
That story, I believe.
a ditch.
I believe the Rebbetzin would have done that. Absolutely. That's
Amazing.
what I
And
believe
she had to run
was.
block for him.
What?
That's a hard job to have, to be the
No, she was. She was very. Look, I came down to the Lower East Side. You mentioned a bris. I made two of my sons had their bris in yeshiva.
I was at both of them.
And
I had to find parking.
you're still looking for it.
I was on the other side of the Williamsburg Bridge. Yeah.
So, but for my son Shimon Meir, it was in January, and Shiva was just getting over a cold, and he put on his coat, and the Rebbetzin said, "Where are you going?" Shiva said, "I have this Frankel as a bris in the Yerushalayim yeshiva." He says, "You're not going." He didn't go. He didn't come. I come to the yeshiva. I had called the night before. I was told everything was set up. The yeshiva was supposed to be the Sunday. And I came to the yeshiva, and we had the whole bris set up, and the yeshiva wasn't there. And they told me, but they said, the Rebbetzin said we can come over afterwards, which is what we did. I actually have what they used to call, now they call it a video, but then it was Super 8. And actually I had sound on this Super 8. And I have the yeshiva holding my son, Shimon Meir, and my son Avi was there at the time also. I gave them brachas. The Rebbetzin was there. We went to the house. But when the Rebbetzin said don't go, he didn't go. He said, but Rebbetzin was very, very careful. We watched Shiva very much.
Now, the Rabbi Orlofsky show, we usually take questions from the audience, but I have to ask you one more question.
Okay.
I have several more, but they're flashing at me to take the question and answer. But one more question. What does it mean in 2023 to be the Rav of an Aguda? Because you taught in day schools, you were the rabbi of Bechur Chamed. I mean, it's a whole different world.
Correct.
Now you're the Rav of an Aguda. What does that mean today, to be a Rav of an Aguda?
So first of all, you have to understand, no two Agudas are the same. There is
Right.
no such thing. Even in Brooklyn, Aguda of one neighborhood is not the same Aguda of another neighborhood, both in size, both in the people. People are different wherever you are. There's no singular individual you're going to have, and you're going to have people. There are a number of agudas in the area. There's a Aguda of Bayswater, and there's a Aguda of Far Rockaway, and a Aguda of West Lawrence, and there's a Aguda of your five towns, and each one of them has its own very unique people. And the idea is that the key that ties all of us together is one singular idea, and that is the kavod and to Gedolei Yisrael. That's something that was a very important aspect of that I felt was really one of the things that makes what I'm doing now very different. Because anyone who walks into the shul understands the shul is going to run and have an idea that there are manhigim. Even the rabbi is not the last say, but the gadol Yisrael is going to be the last say, whoever that gadol happens to be at that specific time.
I'll forget when you were the Rav of Bechur Chamed, and you gave a whole drush on how people were talking about that the black hatters are taking
Yes.
over. And then you
I
took
remember
your black
that one.
hat and you
That's
put it on.
There was a story that came before that about another neighborhood on the island that someone who was a ben yeshiva who became a rabbi in a neighboring shul on the island where there had previously only been a more modern rabbi, and the rabbi got up and put on a black hat and made disparaging remarks about it. And I just felt it needed a response. And so therefore, I did that on Rosh Hashanah. I spoke about the significance and importance and the pride that one has to have to be part of what we call the yeshiva movement, if you want to call it, B'nai Yeshiva, to be Gedolei Yisrael, and the Moetzes Gedolei Yisrael, to know that we we all answer to a higher source ultimately, but in between, we don't know everything, and we need to be able to feel that every individual needs a Rebbe who's above them, and sometimes the Rebbe needs a Rebbe, and there's a whole hierarchy that we have to go through. We realize we want to do what is Ratzon HaBorei, and to be so arrogant as to think that I can wake up in the morning and say, I know what Ratzon HaBorei is, it's not a Jewish concept. You know, by non-Jews, they just sit there and meditate, and they believe that God talks through them. I've met non-Jews who've told me that. I actually had a Giores who told me that her father gave a very difficult time when she wouldn't attend her mother's funeral in the church, how God came to him and spoke to him and told him how horrible that was. And of course, in the world at large today, in the secular world at large today, they know what Judaism is about. You can read it anytime you want. You can read it in the New York Times, you can read it in the Haaretz, you can read it in all of the knowledgeable Jewish newspapers, exactly what God wants from Judaism, what Judaism's supposed to be and what it's all about. We, Baruch Hashem, have Gedolei Yisrael who we're able to talk to, and we're able to contact, and we're able to find out, and we're able to learn from. And we don't have that type of arrogant nature and believe that we are the prophets that can know what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from us. People ask me all the time, they say to me, Rabbi, does God speak to you? And he doesn't speak to me directly, but does he speak to you? How do you know what God wants?
He speaks to me.
He speaks to you? That's good.
Directly.
Glad to hear. I remember, sometimes we know what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. We just don't want to listen. I was once teaching in a classroom, and a young man was telling me what his plans were after high school. And I said to him, I have only one question to ask you. Do you believe in God? He says to me, yes. I said, do you think that's what God wants? He's stunned. He didn't even think about it. It didn't even dawn on him. What does God have? But that's what God wants? Why would I even think about that? We have to understand that. We could think Shvisi Hashem Lenegdi Samid, and we have to know what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. So we either know because we learn it from our Rebbeim, we've gone through schools, we've actually been taught, or if there are things that we don't really know, we haven't been taught, we can still find out. There's still someone who can learn from.
Do the Rabbanim of all the Agudas get together?
Yeah.
There's like a meeting?
Occasionally, at the conventions we have a meeting. There have been some meetings recently on different issues having to deal with the world at large. And for example, technology. When I talk about technology, I mean refrigerators and ovens. That's the technology I'm talking about. We're up. I don't have to get together, and we have there are meetings about that, and we have to deal with those type of issues. And
I was only one time at
an
an Aguda convention. They called me
Yes, you
up
were.
and invited me.
Yes,
And
you were.
I said, aren't you worried that I'm going to say something controversial? And they said, we discussed this. So we're going to give you the women's Shalashidis, and then we'll give you Sunday morning because all the Gedolim leave Motzi Shabbos. I said, I was kidding. I didn't realize there was an actual meeting of how can we invite Orlofsky and minimize the damage. So, so I thought, I didn't know what it was. To go to the Aguda convention, I thought I'm going to be up on the big dais, in between like two Rebbes, and I'll be like, are you finishing the roast beef? Because, and I appreciate you being a Purish and everything. Don't want it to go to waste, But they didn't. They stuck me at a small table off to the side, So. All right, so Ari, our American producer, has been flashing me that there's question and answers. Did we hand out papers, or are we just, since this is Parshas Korach, are we just throwing open the floor? Okay, so the question was asked, how does one have a productive summer?
Am I a therapist, or tips on a productive? See, I'm too old to ask that question. I'll tell you why. Because it's not fair. Because I can't identify with any of the things that are going on these days. I really can't. I hear things that go on. I hear hiking accidents, swimming. I mean, there were always swimming accidents. People went to camp, and Rahman al-Islam, there were also many times issues of, that they were not careful. But what goes on today, boating, bungee jumping, skydiving, these are crazy things. Rabbi Pam once said, they once asked Rabbi Pam, they were talking about the kids going to camp, want to know what to do, take the camp to have a good time. He says, take the kids somewhere to have a good time. Camp is a good time. Why do you need to go anywhere else? I'm old school as far as that's concerned. I find all of these crazy things, even in terms of a lot of the touring that goes on. You want to take a submarine down to see the Titanic? I can arrange it for you, but Yikes. I don't think that anybody wants to do that, Yikes. Right? It's crazy, right? Think about it. This is what we see, and this is what we hear, and this is what goes on, and this is what we aspire. So I can't go see the Titanic, but maybe I can go somewhere else, which is I can afford to go, which is equally as dangerous and just not normal.
I'll tell you what I think the greatest challenge.
I can't identify, so it's not fair.
I can tell you what I think is the greatest challenge of summer. Now that I'm here in America, I've been here for a week and a half. My brother had a barbecue, and there is no way to manage to get through a barbecue without being sick for the next 3 days. There is no USDA recommended amount of frankfurters and hamburgers and steak that a person should eat. You go out and you order a frankfurter or a hamburger, that's called a meal, but it just keeps coming off the grill. And then by the end of the day, you're sweating fat. And it's just, you're sick for days. And I don't know how anybody can possibly survive a summer of barbecues.
Okay.
By the way, corn, your body does not have the ability to digest corn. I'm just going to throw it out there. If nobody else will say it, I'll say it.
Okay. You can send it to me.
When I was younger, I could at least go to a barbecue. I'd only be sick for a day, but now.
But what Rabbi Orlofsky is speaking about speaks to a lot of what's going on today, which is really the consumerism, the consumption, the expectations of them. Once upon a time was ostentatious, is now the poor guy's summer. It's something that is beyond my comprehension. I don't know where to start. I don't have the power to make a start, to do anything. If I had this was up to me, I have certain ideas of type. I have a lot of chinuch ideas that nobody wants to hear. I really do, and I think we'd be living in a different place if I had something, some ability to deal with that. But because I was in chinuch for 40 years, and so it's not like I don't have an idea what kids are about and what the world's about, but there's something wrong here, because the emphasis is on the wrong syllable. Really, we're not reaching the right spot, and when we teach kids, because they grow up expecting to have, the best scotch. It's mamish menuval, it's kedoshim to you. It's the best scotch, the fanciest meats, all kosher, of course, all kosher. And so you're talking about hot dogs. I talk about the fancy butchers or the steakhouses where people are starving in Biafra,
$500.
Right? And you're sitting down to a meal and just throwing away money like crazy. And for what? For where? For when? The expectations, and we're raising kids to really strive to get there. Right. I'm very much, so you can't ask me about the summer.
Yeah.
So the question is, how do you raise your kids today to get them out of the consumption, the consumerism? That's something that you should know. To a certain extent, I think the mechanchim already know that you have to give a little bit. And you can't live on, look, we don't live on the standards of our parents, and our parents didn't live on the standards of their parents, and we would never dream of living in a 3-bedroom walk-up without an elevator and no air conditioning in the summertime. We'd never do that, right? But our grandparents lived like that. So there is a change, and it doesn't mean it has to change you.
Move to Milwaukee.
Okay.
There's nothing there.
Okay.
Where'd you grow up in New Jersey?
Pinebrook.
Pinebrook.
Yeah.
Move to Pinebrook, New Jersey.
And there's nothing there.
And there's nothing there.
Yeah. And the little forest behind my house is not even there anymore. But so you have to, it's hard for me, from my perspective as a grandparent now, as a great-grandparent, Baruch Hashem, to be able to give that direction. But you have to set the standard, though. You really have to set. It's based on what is around. You know where you sent your kids to. You know where you send your kid to yeshiva. You know you sent your kids to Beis Yaakov. You know what school they're in. You know what's going on. You know, and you make choices. And based on those choices, yes, it's true. They do see things, and the standards are very different than you had when you were growing up, and their kids will have when they're growing up. It's just I don't know where it ends. But there has to be a gvul. It has to be not everything, not every toy, not every gadget, not every need. There's a word that doesn't seem to exist in the educational system. Parents seem to not know how to say no, because if they say no, their kid's going to go off the derech. That's always, I'm going to go off the derech. You don't say no, I'm going off the derech. I used to have kids in my class that weren't from Rabbi, because of you, I'm not going to be religious. So now you are religious? So I will change course if you're religious now. The idea is that there has to be a certain amount. You need to have, there has to be a rule. Some people, they have to know that there's a certain authority where you no to something, and that can't be yes to everything. That's my, and I think that there are plenty of educators out there who will disagree with me on that, but it's got to stop somewhere.
Who's the Aguda considered the Manhig Hador today?
See, that's a different. Today we're in a period of time where after after Gershon's Petira, and in America we have the Moetzes Gedolei Torah, still have a Moetzes Gedolei Torah. And there are other very big Rosh Yeshivas that you have to know. You have to set. If you're Chassidish Yid, you have your Rebbe. You have to know. That's where it goes.
So who does the Aguda today say this is the?
They have it. I don't. Again, who eventually fills the slot of where Reb Gershon was, where Reb Chaim was, I don't know. That's still in the process of happening. But we still have it's not like every shayla I had, I called Reb Gershon, right? I didn't go into Reb Chaim for every question, even though there were plenty of people who went to Reb Chaim for everything. But they traveled, they had shuttles going to Reb Chaim for everything. But now it's got to be, it's a little bit different, but there's still, you don't think, Alman Yisrael, there's still Gedolei Yisrael and Poskim and Gedolei Yisrael, so again, like it was asked before, if I had a difficult child, I would speak to Reb Reuven, but other people speak to someone else. There are other Gedolei Yisrael. Unfortunately, until recently, if I had big questions, I would go to Reb Shmuel. My kids are very close to Reb Shmuel, and but it's a terrible. The laws for Klal Yisrael not to have access to him is unbelievable, because he always answered the phone himself. You could just call and he picked up the phone, and so he was one of those easy contacts that today, unfortunately, we don't have. So it's just a matter of finding your slot. Again, you have to have your Rebbe. Everybody has to have someone they speak to. Everyone. There's no such thing.
Okay, so this is the question. What do you do if you have a conflict between your family and God? I go with God. Because he can help me a lot more than my family can. family comes and goes, but at the end of the day, I gotta look God in the face, and I gotta be honest. And sometimes, listen, you're gonna have choices. It's always gonna come down to choices, and there's no way to make everybody happy. I saw this sign in a school office, and I've seen it in a bunch of them. I don't know if it's official or not, but it says, "I can only make one person happy a day. Today is not your day. Tomorrow doesn't look good either." And I've seen that sign up in a whole bunch of school, offices, by the secretary. So, for me, I didn't grow up in a Shomer Shabbos home. And when I started to become frum, I was in conflict a lot. And at some point, I realized that even though my parents kept a kosher home, there were problems that were very serious. And I did not know how to get my parents to solve the problems. And the Kadosh Baruch Hu came to my aid. So I was not home the day my brother burnt down the kitchen, because my parents were sure I was behind it. But a girl in my class, her father had passed away, and I went on bicycle from North Merrick to Levittown, which was miles, to go and pay a shiva call. When I came home, so I wasn't there when my brother wanted blintzes, and he didn't know how to cook. I know how to cook because there were 6 boys in my family, and most people don't know this, but when, there's certain, reptiles, frogs and others, that when they're all males, some of them turn into females. And that's what happened in my house. I became the token girl. So my brother didn't know how to cook. So he filled up a frying pan with oil and went to watch the game. And at some point he realized the house was filled with smoke, and he comes in and sees so he throws water on it. Yeah. And anyway, the halachic term for that is called liban gamor. And the hot oil spread all over the kitchen and burnt everything down. And my mother was like, "Why weren't you here?" I said, "A girl in my class, I went on my bicycle to Levittown to pay a shiva call." I was like, but now if we're going to make some changes, I do have some suggestions. And that solved a lot of the problems, So given a choice, and my parents knew this, that given a choice, and my parents didn't really understand halacha, but they were sure. Like, for example, they say, "Could you get something from the refrigerator?" And I said, "No, Mom, because the light goes on and you won't let me unscrew the light bulb, So my mother was very frustrated. She said, "What if we put one of those strings around the house? Then could you do it?" I said, "No, Mom, I can't." It's But lot, we solved all the problems. And then after my father's heart attack, he moved to West Hampstead, and where my brothers were, and they became Shomer Shabbos. And one of my nieces said, "Yeah, we go over at Grandma and Grandpa's house on Shabbos, and Grandma makes cholent for everybody, and Grandpa plays bingo." I said, "These are the same people who told me if I put on a blech, I was going to burn down the house. And now they're Bubby and Zadie sitting there making cholent. How did that happen? Where did I miss that part, So I had to fight over, lots of things. And, and at some point, your first allegiance has to be to a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and then to your family, and then to everything that goes with it, So, you're going to have conflicts. Yes, sir. If I had the chance, would I raise my kids as Israelis? Rav Mendel Weinbach said this to me. He said, "You tried to raise an American family in Eretz Yisrael." And I said, "You didn't?" And he said, "No. When I moved to Eretz Yisrael, I only raised my kids speaking Hebrew, and my kids are Israelis. And they're like all Israelis. They hate Americans. They tolerate me." That's what he said to me. So I have a problem. I have to live in Eretz Yisrael. My soul does not allow me to live in Chutz La'aretz. I can't breathe. I'm like the mashal that Rabbi Akiva gives of the fish in the water, that he has to live in the water. Israel is a very hard place to live, very hard. And Israelis are very difficult people, and it's a tough way. And I can honestly say that all of my kids paid a price for my decision to live in Eretz Yisrael, and it was difficult, but I needed to, and so if I could raise my kids as Israelis, would I do it? No, I don't think I would, because my kids tell me all the time, Abba, we're not Israelis, we're not Americans. Yesh sug acher that are called American Israelis, or Israeli Americans. And most of them married other American Israelis, except one daughter who married a straightforward American. If my kids would have married straight Israelis, I wouldn't have objected, but I would have had a lot of fun at their expense because I don't really speak Hebrew. So one of my nieces married a straight American, and I just make fun of him constantly, and he has no idea what I'm saying, So, so at the end of the day, I think living in Eretz Yisrael is a tremendous chus, and it's very hard. And I'm not capable of raising kids as Israelis. I'm not an Israeli. I don't know how, So my son, when you have older children, they sit around the table and discuss how you destroyed their lives. And this is what they enjoy doing. And my son said, one of the things you did that you really messed us up is you insisted that we tell the truth. And Israelis are all liars. Mendel said this to me, He said, whenever an Israeli says anything to you, you have to figure out what they really mean, because they all lie. And so everybody would be fooling around in the class, and the principal would come in and say, who is talking? And I knew that if I lied, I would get into trouble. So I said, me. He says, anybody else? No. And I would get the punishment. I said, you should get punished over and over again and let people know that you tell the truth. And I don't know that they appreciated that insight. But that was, it's a challenge. It's a challenge in Eretz Yisrael. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Why is there no major push from the Rabbanim to move to Eretz Yisrael? So you being one of the major Rabbanim, why is there no push to move to Eretz Yisrael?
I thought he asked you the question.
I would say, if based on the ones that I've spoken to, because it's very hard. It's hard. It's hard to live there. And so therefore, only someone who really wants to do it can manage to handle it, because it's very hard. It's a hard life. An American family that moves there is going to be at a disadvantage. Your kids will move there. They don't know the language. They don't have the protexia. That's an Israeli word, protexia. In English, it means corruption. And in America, what they call protexia, you could go to jail for, means that, you have to take 3 months to get an appointment with a doctor. But if my mother knows the secretary so they can move you to the front of the line, that's illegal. But in Israel, we call it protexia. It has such a nice sound to it, And so you can get your kid into the school if you have protexia, and all these kind of things are protexia. But, Americans come in and we don't know how to play the game like Israelis do. And we're at a disadvantage. The way I put it is, my grandfather came from Vengrove, and he came to Brownsville, and he never learned English. He spoke Yiddish his whole life, and my father had to make it on his own. I grew up as an entitled American, and I know my way through the system. And then I moved to Eretz Yisrael, and my kids are like my father. They have to make it on their own. I can't help them because I don't understand how things work. I still don't. So one of my kids had cancer, and they had to figure out how to manage the system. I tried, but I don't know how Israelis work, But his Rebbeim helped him, and they worked through the system, and I just did the best that I could. But I don't know. I don't understand what it means to be an Israeli. Israelis have a different way of doing things, My kids would say to me, Abba, how come we're the only ones on the block with an old car? How come all the Israelis have new cars? I said, I don't know. They all sit and learn in Kollel, and they make $600 a month, and they all have new cars. I don't know how it works. So that's why I think that people say it's hard, and so to make a big push, unless you know how to do it, it's difficult.
I'd like to just take a small stab at that also, because I'm here and you're there.
Yes.
So there, as the rabbi explained, living in Eretz Yisrael is niknas b'yisurim, but there really are. I have two of my daughters live in Eretz Yisrael, raised families in Eretz Yisrael. As soon as they got married, they moved to Eretz Yisrael. So their children were born in Eretz Yisrael. At the same time, I have family that's here, and I'm here. To make a big push for everyone is not everyone can do it. Not everyone has the stamina. A lot of people have tried and have had to come back. And Baruch Hashem, most of them go and they're able to stay. They're able to make a go of it and make it work. Again, a lot depends on how old your children are at the specific time. There's certain periods of time in a person's life where your children are not of the right age to be able to go. But as far as those of us who stay here and haven't even made an effort to go, not even thinking about it, because there's a lot to be done here too. It's not like there is an advantage to living in Eretz Yisrael, no question about it. And the rabbi's correct. Living in Eretz Yisrael is a big schus. There's no question about that. It's the Kedushas Haaretz, so it's something we strive for, something we daven for 3 times a day. I mean, but there are issues that are here that need to be taken care of also. If all of the rabbis, all of the Rabbanim, all of the from people would decide to move, what would happen to everybody else who's not? We've done quite a pretty decent job here over the course of the years, and you can't just abandon the world, the world of American Jewry, and just all the Rabbanim pick up, and the Rabbanim I can't make a push for people to move to Eretz Yisrael. I'm living here, and I'm not going anywhere. There are those Rabbanim who say that we are going, and I'm going to take you with me, and we're going to make a move. We're going to all go together, and we'll make it work over there. But everybody has to feel their responsibility. Everybody has to feel where their achrayus is. And if you have an achrayus, some of us have an achrayus here, we can't abandon that achrayus and leave the people, just abandon the people that are here. I know Rabbi Feinstein was living in Luban, Russia, right? He stayed until he couldn't stay anymore because he had a responsibility to his children. He didn't leave as long as he had girls. His older 2 children were girls. He stayed. Rebbetzin Shizgal, Zechron Levracha, went to school, in the Russian school. She was the valedictorian. She was supposed to be the valedictorian. But she wasn't because she was Jewish. Her mother actually came to her graduation, and they wouldn't allow her to be the valedictorian because she was Jewish. But they went to school there. But when Reb Reuven was born here. When Reb Dovid was getting old enough, the Shiva realized that this is no Eitzah. He needs to leave. He needs to leave because of his own children. Reb Dovid is the reason the Shiva came to America. And but he left his flock because of his family, to save his family. He left his flock. But to abandon your flock, you just can't walk away from them just like that. Yes. There is a tshuva from Rabbi Feinstein for a Shiva in Igros Moshe that seems to imply that it is permissible for a woman who covers her hair to allow for a tefach in the front to be exposed. Is that the question you're asking me? Or that's what it's evolved into. It just isn't true. Okay, right. It isn't true. And I've heard Reb Dovid has spoke about that many times. He was asked that question. He actually wrote a letter on the subject, and the Shiva's tshuva was referring to a question having to do with tefach, has to do with saying Kriya Shema. So you're allowed to say Kriya Shema with a tefach of what we call erva exposed. And so therefore, really, it's 2 etzbos in the front, and it's another 2 etzbos, 5 etzbos is a tefach, and so therefore, it's the 4 or 5, depending on what type of tefach we're talking about. But he was talking about the permissibility of Again, I heard this from Reb Dovid more than once, and he wrote a letter about it. That it was only referring to the permissibility of davening, saying Kriya Shema in the front of exposed hair.
So just to clarify, it's not permissible at all.
Excuse me?
So just to clarify, it's not permissible at all.
It's not permissible except for what Chazal say is that the hair that comes out on the sides of the head, that's something that does not, the hairline doesn't run around automatically by itself. So when you cover your head, so they're on the sides, there's sometimes hair that can stick out. That's not a problem.
Yes, sir.
That is correct. Yes, sir.
Are you allowed to go to Har Habayis?
All the Gedolim Yisrael, all the Gedolim Yisrael have paskin. What is? Okay, Har Habayis is where they say Har Habayis is now. It's the other side. Anywhere on the other side of the Kosel Maravi, if you go there, you'll pay the price one day. It's very simple. You can come to Shemayim, they're going to ask you, who paskin that halacha for you? Which gadol told you was mutter to come here? Right or wrong or indifferent. I don't care who you are. No one's big enough to paskin a shayla for themselves. And to go and violate what Gedolei Yisrael, that's mamish, is Dvar Hashem Boza. Dvar Hashem Boza. You're going against what the Gedolei Yisrael have for at least centuries, have said where it's usher for you to go. And why? Why? We even have a shaila, have a suffix. Why? You're so frum. You want to bow down on Har Habayis. Come to shul 3 times a day. It's just have more kavanah during davening. You have to go. That's how you have to show your religiosity. That's what you have to show. Has nothing to do with being frum. It's nationalistic. That's all it is. And that's not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to listen to Gedolei Yisrael and follow what they say. And we daven on this side of the Kosel. And that's where we belong. And that's where they come. And if we do that, we'll find. If we go on the other side, asidin litin asadin. No question about it.
All right. Well, this has been a lot of fun, everybody. A special thank you to our special guest, Rabbi Yitzchok Frankel, the Rav of the Aguda of the 5 Towns. If you would like to get the Sefer Shas and Shuvas Yad Dodi, how would they go about doing that?
Well, hopefully it's in the Sfarim stores, and if you're not near a Sfarim store, it's judaicapress.com.
Judaicapress.com for those of you who have a goyish neighbor with the internet. And Rabbi Frankel's other Svarim.
Machat Shel Yad. I have
Machat Shel Yad on Chumash.
On Chumash and Megillas Esther, and on
those are Megillas Rus.
I'm sorry, you're right. It is Megillas Rus.
Thank you.
Megillas Rus and on Aguda Shel Pesach. The reason I was just giving shir on Megillas Esther. So yeah, it's Megillas Rus, and so there are 5 volumes on the Chamisha.
I remember we talked once about your Mahalach and Megillas Rus and the changing perspective, which is very kedai.
Yeah. So,
and that's it for now. So if you want to find out more about the Rabbi Orlofsky show, you can go to my website, RabbiOrlofsky.com.
If you have a non-Jewish neighbor, of course.
No, anyone who's going to go to my website is the non-Jewish neighbor. And that's it. Until the next time, hopefully this will go up on definitely on Torah Anytime, wherever else it goes. That's it. Until next time, I am Rabbi Orlofsky, and this has been the Dovid Orlofsky I'm Not Dead show.
It's the Rabbi Orlofsky show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky show. Knowledge and wisdom will help you grow. Lots of fun in every episode, and we don't have to rhyme. No, we don't. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky show on RabbiOrlofsky.com. Torah anytime, YouTube and more. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky show. Till next time, till we meet again. the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.